Hey everyone, thanks for watching the video podcast for homework tonight on page 21. I'm going to call this part 1 about workers in the workplace. And was wondering if any of your parents maybe are in labor unions. Pittsburgh has a pretty strong tradition for having labor unions, and there's the Labor Day parade picture down here on the bottom right. And that's because of our timeline of history in Pittsburgh, where we had so many of these mills forming at the turn of the century when things were pretty rough, long shifts, very dangerous, people get hurt. And workers are going to say, enough's enough. I want to live my life with my kids and my family. I don't want to have to risk my life going to work. So maybe some of your parents work in small companies, just a few, maybe a few dozen workers. And in other words, does the boss know their name? I would call that a small company. Or maybe they work in a huge company with hundreds of workers, and I bet maybe your parents don't know like the CEO on a first name basis, that kind of thing. Well, as in the late 1800s, companies get bigger, 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 these massive mills, and it becomes like a real us versus them. You don't know your boss doesn't really know you, you're just a number. And that just, anytime something like that happens, it leads to a whole us versus them attitude, and people start butting heads. So that's what this is about. Hopefully, your volume's on, and you're on page 21. And please just take notes. It's not hard. This is not complicated at all. We're just freeing up some class time for better things, more useful, more fun things in school. And don't forget to take the quiz afterwards. So, real simple here on your paper. What kind of jobs do men have back in the late 1800s, early 1900s? You know what it is: mills, factories, mines, that kind of thing. So, you can as I go through this, pause it when you need to, of course. Although you're all probably watching this on like 3 times speed on YouTube. So maybe you're working in a factory for like the Model T, and you're making the Model T, and all day long you assemble like the gas tank, I guess. Or maybe you're the tire guy, and that's what you do all day long. A couple of years ago at homecoming, there's a guy driving a Model T, and he let me sit in it, pose for a picture. Those things are so cool because they're just so simple, and if something breaks, you replace it and move on. Or maybe you're a man working in a coal mine. Pittsburgh has such a proud and like dominant history with the coal mines. So much of the region's coal comes from Western PA. And by the way, in the old days, like early 1800s, it was Glenshaw. We'll talk about that in hopefully freshman forum. But yeah, we had coal mines in Shaler, believe it or not, too. So that'd be fun to hunch over like that all day long. Let me show you one of these mill jobs. This is at Westinghouse in Pittsburgh. Westinghouse, one of the factories, the steel mills, they're working on a giant O-ring. And so maybe you're the fire guy poking the fire, getting the steel nice and soft, like liquidy soft, so you can smash it in a second. You'll see with the, what's it called? Sledgehammer guys. Or you can be the chain guy over here that's pulling that chain on the pulley up above, so it's about to make this ring go vertical in a second. And like these guys don't even have gloves on. They don't have face masks to protect from any like sparks flying. So here you go, spin it around. In come the sledgehammer dudes. Can you imagine all day long that's your job? Can you imagine how your back would hurt when you go home? How strong your back would be, I guess. Look how precise. You ever swung an axe or a sledgehammer and you miss? It's like not only super embarrassing but very dangerous. Unbelievable. So when we say Pittsburghers worked in steel mills, I mean that's what your job could have looked like for pap 1904 that was. Okay, then talk about children. Of course, children had very active jobs back in the days. There was no labor laws that said kids couldn't work, so they used them and they paid them less usually. Children also worked often in very dangerous jobs, like maybe textile mills to make cloth or clothing, tobacco factories, coal mines, and garment shops. Boy, all those sound so much fun. Let's look at a picture of a boy and do what they call observation inference. If you look at his picture, you can kind of make an inference as to perhaps what his job was. If you look, like, what's on his head? What's that all about? What if I told you that this held a fuel in there, and inside this is the wick of a flame, kind of like a tiki torch? And there's some kind of tracks behind him. And if you've ever seen Scooby-Doo cartoons, you know, oh, wait a minute, maybe he's working in a coal mine. Maybe he's a coal mine kid. And that's correct. And by the way, this is probably a pack of cigarettes here. It could be something different, but the foil, I'm wondering if that's a pack of cigarettes. Look how filthy his mouth is. That means he's breathing in coal dust all day long. Imagine what this poor kid's lungs look like. I wonder, I wonder if he was able to live a long life or not, or if he developed the infamous black lung, they call it. But yeah, he's part of the Breaker Boys crew, especially like northeastern Pennsylvania, up on the way to like Scranton. These kids worked in these coal mines, and they didn't get to go to school like you and living in a air-conditioned high school with nice, clean uh, situation. But it says on their paper, kids have small hands. Thanks to their small hands and their fingers, they could do certain jobs maybe that adults couldn't do, or maybe adults didn't want to do. So like, hey, we'll make these kids do it. We'll pay them. We'll pay them much less than the adults. Plus, hey, they're kids. They're not gonna complain. Hey, mister, you know what? I'm fed up with this, mister. We're going on strike. Well, he looks happy. What's that? Algebra class, you say? Huh. I wish I knew algebra. Poor kids. They're all bundled up, too. Can you imagine working outside in the winter in Scranton? No thanks. Please. Please, I'll take American history class. I never learned to read or write. Okay. And women sometimes had it the worst. I'll show you a clip here. Here are women working at a very typical... This is a Westinghouse in Pittsburgh, by the way. Westinghouse, turn of the century. Coil winding factory. Look at that. Each woman is just a wheel in the, or what is it called? A cog in the wheel doing the same exact job, twisting whatever kind of wire or copper. I don't know what this is, but all day long. And remember, a full day shift today for most people might be 8 hours because unions fought to get 8-hour shifts. But these girls are probably working 10, maybe 12 hours. Who knows? And by the way, it was 6 days a week in the old days. Sunday was all you had off because Sunday was the Sabbath for Christians. And so that was the day to go to church and rest. But, oh man, all day long. Can you imagine? And look, notice the supervisor's walking around. And there was one man. There's the man who's a supervisor, and he's making sure they're working hard. No slacking. No texting on your cell phone, of course. No quick cigarette break. Things like that. Kidding about the cell phone. So we've got that. But yeah, this is what a factory might look like for a woman. A lot of times, the invention of the Singer sewing machine, the Singer brand sewing machine, which is very famous, it's the Cadillac of sewing machines, made factories like this possible. So these are not like mega factories like you might be picturing, big warehousey kind of things. This would be like a 3-4 story building, maybe 5-story building, made of brick. And you'd see it today down like in a city downtown. You'd be like, oh, I didn't realize that was a factory. It doesn't look like it'd be as big as a factory, but that's what they had. And you're crammed in there, and all day long you're sitting there and you're making or sewing, whatever you're doing. No thanks. And in this case, they're making something called a shirtwaist, very fashionable. They around late 1890s and the early 1900s was the shirtwaist. All the girls were wearing it, and it was just classy. It's just what you did. The button, it's like a button-up shirt, but it had little frillies, little frillies on it. But instantly, this went out of style. And there's a very strong reason why this went out of style. It's because this horrible fire happened. I'll tell you about it, and I'll explain why that made the shirtwaist go out of style. This terrible fire happened. It happened in New York City, and this is the Oklahoma State Capitol newspaper, it's called. And the fact that it's a headline, front page headline, big, huge, bold letters, in Oklahoma, even though it happened in New York City, that shows you this was a big deal. And so here's a picture of the building where this is going on. It's New York City, like I said, in the garment district, they call it. And this is the tall building, and if you're good at math, you could count how many stories these buildings are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 at the very top. But unfortunately, the fire happened at the top few floors, and you can see that ladder is only going to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, something like 6th or 7th story. They brought the tallest ladders that New York City had, but it wasn't tall enough. This was a shirtwaist factory called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and this horrible fire happened. And they don't know exactly how. They assume it was a cigarette, perhaps, or some kind of spark in the wastebasket where like all the extra cloth was, all the dust, all the lint, just immediately caught fire for whatever reason. And turns out the company wasn't keeping up with. There weren't really many fire codes back then, but there were some like goals, restrictions. They weren't paying attention to it at all. So these girls had two options: stay up there, burn alive, because the stairs were cut off. Turns out from access. Or option 2, jump to your death. Jump 8 stories, 9 stories, 10 stories to your death to the sidewalk below. So you're looking at bodies of women. And actually, it really should be girls. Most of them were girls, like literally 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. A lot of them young immigrant women and girls from a heavy Jewish population in this part of New York City, in the garment industry, they call it. And here across the street, they had to create a makeshift morgue. Those are unfortunately dead bodies in the caskets across the street. People trying to identify them, they were hard to identify, they say, because their bodies were so mangled. Very traumatic. And again, this is like about 150 people. So this Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, fire caught out, and it spread like crazy because of the cloth. Just like, whew, went up. 150 died, mostly women, mostly girls. Because it turns out after investigation, they were locked inside when the fire broke out. It turns out the bosses, Messieurs Blanc and Harris were their names, they wanted to keep the women hard at work. Hey, get back to work. No breaks. And they would lock the one door to get out to the staircase. They would chain it up and lock it so the women couldn't. He funneled them to the one exit only on a daily basis when their shift was over, because he wanted to check their bags to make sure they weren't stealing extra cloth. Because at the time period, a lot of people would go home and make piecemeal, meaning you would make garments at home for extra money and sell them like one by one. And he was making sure they weren't stealing money. So he locked a second exit, chained it. So when this fire broke out, these girls were like literally trapped and had no other option. It's so sad. So this shocked America, and that's why we have things like, well, you tell me. I mean, but fire escapes, and even our high school has like so many staircases because we don't have windows. But if you add them up, I think it's like 9 or 10, or maybe even more staircases to choose from. And the doorways to fire exits. When you leave a classroom, when you leave a building, the doors have to open out in case there's a fire in the building. You have to be able to get out without people like getting in the way of the door. Fire extinguishers have to be every so often. There's a fire extinguisher around the bend from my classroom. If you look up at the ceiling, there's the sprinkler systems, things like that. It's all fire code. So it's pretty scary stuff. And unfortunately, it takes a tragedy sometimes for big changes like that to happen. So I'm going to stop for right now, and I'm going to call that part 1. I'm going to press pause and check in with me to see if part 2 is assigned now or tomorrow. Depends on what year this is.